So you have a recent audio essay for the New York Times asking the question, how do we stay humane in inhumane times? It is a great question, especially in these times. It's a question that, of course, needs to be asked in Israel only because as we move toward through this war and toward the end of the war, the question is, what does the region look like the day after, and how do we move toward a two-state solution, which we have to have?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about us, we who have to live with this world, live with the brutality of the world, and those of us who just follow the news and who are involved in bitter, angry, negative emotion conversations a lot these days. And so to me, there are two wisdom traditions here we can draw on. The one you associate with the city of Athens, which is ancient Greeks. They had constant warfare in Greece. And so they showed themselves tragedy after tragedy, these tragic plays. And they were to induce humility that don't imagine we're going to be ever living in a world of peace beyond the world of war. The crust of civilization is thin, and you have to stare it right in the face. And the tragedies said we have to be humble in the face of this. We have to know that we don't always control our own lives, our own destinies. Things happen. We have to stare that in the face. We also have to move cautiously. Thucydides said in politics, the lows are lower than the highs are highs, meaning when a politician screws up, things get really bad. When they do something good, you get a little incremental improvement. So be cautious and always be suspicious of your own rage. It feels great to be enraged. It's also blinding. And so that's the wisdom tradition, though. It's sort of the skepticism of the head. But then Jerusalem, the centerpiece of three great Abrahamic faiths, audacity of the heart. That what people need in hard and brutal times is recognition. The sense, I see you, I will respect you, you're a human being with a soul. And so even when life is brutal, it's still right, this tradition teaches us, to lead with curiosity, to lead with respect, to lead with trust. And will you be betrayed in times like this? For sure. But it's still worth it to lead with trust, because most of the time I've found that people will trust you back.
Wow.
Well, and David, talk about specifically how that applies to the conflict that we were just talking about, the war that we're talking about, as Israel faces, again, the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, and the great paradox of having to figure out how to move forward and do two things at one time: root out Hamas, but at the same time, see and I know this is, nobody wants to hear this right now, but it goes to what you're saying. Start seeing the Palestinian situation in a way that actually helps Israel by helping the Palestinians move beyond, because and we bring up Netanyahu not because we are interested in Israeli domestic politics, but because it impacts the United States, it impacts the region, it impacts the world, and it impacts human beings on the ground. But how do they move forward in a way that guarantees a two-state solution, guarantees that warfare, endless warfare since 1948, comes to an end?
Yeah, well, I covered the Middle East mostly in the 90s and the 2000s. And I would go, and in that time it was the Oslo peace process. We really thought, a lot of us thought peace was at hand. And I had a kid. My kid was, when he was young, he would only nap when you drove him around the car. And so I would drive him around the West Bank. And there were no checkpoints back then, Ramallah, Hebron, even. And it seemed like peace was at hand. And I remember going to dinner, a big dinner that Shimon Peres, the then Israeli president, threw. And it was half Palestinians and half Israelis, and they were the negotiators. And they got along great. They'd spent 40 years in the peace process business. And so there actually was real rapport there. Every year since then, there's been more dehumanization. When you go to Israel now, they don't talk about Palestinians in the same way. It's a lot more bitter and cruel and often racist. And the Palestinians the same. And so, and then my son, the one I used to drive around the West Bank, he enlisted in the Israeli Defense Forces about back 7 or 8 years ago, he served in those spots where I used to drive him, and it had all gotten much worse. And so that's a deterioration of the moral culture where people have just stopped seeing each other. And that's a core problem. That's a cultural and social problem that the political leadership, if they want to deal with it, will have to deal with.
Yeah, and a lot of countries are seeing some version of that, including here.